Hi, everybody. Welcome to Song Tripping. I'm Jim, and I'm joined by a special guest today, Ken Pobo. Ken is a former colleague of mine who's now enjoying his retirement. And I'm sure you're listening to a lot of CDs and records and have more and more time to do that than ever before. Welcome to the show, Ken. Welcome back.
Thanks a lot, Jim. I always enjoy being here.
I want to call this episode Bubblegum 101. So this is a show that introduces our audience to the bubblegum genre, the bubblegum of the late 1960s. And Ken, you're sort of an aficionado of this genre. You know a lot about it. So tell me a little bit about what bubblegum is, what it means to you, and how you started listening to it. When did you first get exposed to the genre?
Well, in a way, that means we have to think about definitions a little bit. Uh, the term bubblegum became popularized more in 1968. I was already listening to the radio and popular music before then. I would almost think the proto bubblegum would have been, in the mid to late 60s, things that would be popular on the radio that might have more of a slant toward younger listeners, of which I was one at that time. I mean, I started getting into music in 1966 when I was 11 years old. I almost think maybe a term for that pre-proto bubblegum time would be teeny bopper music. And I think that that would be kind of appropriate, but some people that made that music got tagged later on with that name bubblegum, and it was kind of meant as an insult. Oh, it's only for kids, there's no real substance to it, and which actually is kind of not always true. But Tommy James, I think, is the person that I think suffered a lot by being named bubblegum. Once that word kind of gelled, it became very dismissive.
And how would you characterize the sound of bubblegum? Like the type of music it is, aside from its appeal to younger kids.
It's it has some roots in garage music, I think, but it's been kind of changed. It's a little chunky. There's kind of a beat. There's often some sort of maybe fast-moving organ that kind of goes through many of the songs here. But once again, I find it if you listen to bubblegum albums, like you've got one right behind you that, I'm looking at the 1, 2, 3 Red Light album by the 1910 Fruit Gum Company. You can find songs that I just don't think bubblegum fits. I mean, and or sometimes you can find songs that would be on B-sides. And it's like, well, if you took that name off of it, you might not even think of that name. So uh, even though the album is basically seemed to be geared toward maybe younger listeners that way, there are things that can pop out that challenge those definitions.
Nice. I'm going to refer to one of my Bibles here. This is the All Music Guide to Rock. I think I bought this back in the 90s. This is a very well-worn copy. Do you have any of these All Music Guides?
I don't actually. I probably should have at least one, but I
These
got
are
a bunch of music books, but not that one.
these are great. Like I learned so much about music. It has, retro like reviews, and it goes through like so many artists, so many different styles, and at the end of the book, they go through different genres. So I wanted to share this article, which was written by Richie Unterberger, critic, and one of the editors of the book. And this is some things that he talks about, like with regard to bubblegum. I'm just curious what your reactions are to this. So I'll read a few snippets of this if you don't mind. So he starts considering bubblegum's fairly meager legacy, a few dozen hits in the late 60s and early 70s. It inspired a lot of heated discussion and revisionism. It arose at a time when the listener demographic for rock was expanding rapidly. Originally marketed almost exclusively to teenagers, like you were about to be a teenager when this first started, right? Those teenagers were now growing up, leaving their teens and continuing to buy and play rock and roll. At the same time, the purchasing power of preteens was growing. Too young in most cases to appreciate the subtleties of Tommy or Cloud Nine. They needed a simple form of rock and roll to identify with, and Bubblegum was created to satisfy their desires.
That's pretty right. I think anyways, yeah.
And he started like they include also these music maps in these genre articles. So let me sort of zoom in and show that to you. You can see that the he says the forerunners of bubblegum would be groups like the Monkees, Tommy James, and Tommy Rowe.
Yeah, that would be true.
You called that like proto bubblegum, right?
I guess so. I once again, these terms are a little slippery.
Yes. But the heart of it was the Kazinet's Cats productions. Can you talk a little bit about that, what they were all about?
Yeah, Jerry and Jeff. uh, One thing about them is they often went into the Midwest, places like Ohio and Michigan, and took these bands that were bands. And once they got a hold of them, they Jeff and Jerry them into the bubblegum mold. And in a way, I don't even think on a lot of those records, the group was even, they had the name, but they maybe weren't playing on that. The Ohio Express. Oh, I'll show you the Ohio Express.
What are we looking at? What releases?
This is the Ohio Express. It's just an anthology of 24 tracks of their work. And, they even, Jeff and Jerry brought in a whole new lead vocalist. So you have the first album, which is a little bit more garagey, called Beg, Borrow, and Steal. And that was on the Cameo label, but Cameo was going out the tubes then, and they went on to Buddha. Buddha became kind of a bubblegum mega label, at least for that couple of years there. And so, like with the Ohio Express, who had some big bubblegum hits, but the lead vocalist was Joey Levine and not the guys that were actually members of the group that way. So the sound that the group would have made was obviously changed very much by the studio machinations, shall we say, of Kazinet's Cats.
Where
And
do
I
you know?
don't say that so negatively, because I like the music.
Right, dude. Where were they making these records? Like, were they producing them in New York or like the West Coast or
I'm
what?
thinking it was New York.
New York? Okay. Let me read a little more from the article here. Um, Most of the early bubblegum records were manufactured at Buddha by the production team of Jerry Kaznitz and Jeff Katz, emphasizing repetitive, throbbing bass lines, simple, sing-along lyrics, cheesy organs, and insinuatingly, some would say obnoxiously catchy melodies. How could you have an obnoxiously catchy melody? I mean, a melody is catchy or it isn't. Their hit singles by the Ohio Express and the 1910 Fruit Gum Company were played by session men. The groups didn't exist outside of the studio. So these groups like never toured, did they? Like, did they play
Well,
live?
that's not true. I mean,
Okay.
uh, what was what would tour or be on television might be very different from what the group initially thought itself to be, because it was so transformed by Kazinet's Cats.
Just to continue, dubbed bubblegum for its childish qualities, mass production values, and instant disposability, it was celebrated as such in the minor 1969 hit single Bubblegum Music, released by the unforgettable rock and roll double bubble trading card company of Philadelphia, 19141. Do you know
That
about
was not a
that?
huge hit.
Okay.
But yeah, it's a big celebration of bubblegum music, you know. And oh, another thing that's kind of not in all cases, but often seems to be true, that the lead vocalist will sound a little nasal. I don't know why that kind of was considered, but yeah. But you know, some of the bigger hits of bubblegum music, the guy mentioned something about the lyrics. You know, like the Ohio Express's biggest hit was called "Yummy, Yummy, Yummy," and the chorus on that, "Yummy, Yummy, Yummy, I got love in my tummy." Well, I mean, maybe you know, someone in second grade could write that. You know, I mean, simple rhymes, very in a way it's catchy because they are simple, and they kind of stay in your head, and they're kind of singable too.
Absolutely, very catchy. Don't you think there's some double entendre in bubblegum music too?
Oh my God, chewy chewy. Gee, I wonder what that's about. Chew me out of my mind. I guess it was supposed to be about bubblegum, but I have a feeling. Well, and you know, I'll just make a small surmisal. At that adolescent age, and you're beginning to find out about your body and romance and stuff like that, you know, the double entendre was probably kind of fun. And I was such an innocent kid in some ways. I'm not sure I got it anyways.
Right, right. Um, Continuing on here, we have to talk about the Archies too. So it didn't take long for the Archies, masterminded by brilliant brill building tunesmith and producer Jeff Barry, to establish themselves as the most successful bubblegum group. Would you agree? The Archies?
Well, if you look at their song from 1969, "Sugar Sugar," it was record of the year. That was not on Buddha. That was on Kirshner. And of course, that would be Don Kirshner's label. He had worked with the Monkees before, and he became kind of a big name later on, even into the 70s, kind of an impresario, you might say.
Right. So back to our music map, like you can see that a sort of a subcategory of bubblegum would be the TV bubblegum stars, like the Archies, the Banana Splits. What about Josie and the Pussycats? Th- these TV tie-ins, right? And that goes back
Well,
to the
and
Monkees.
essentially cartoons,
They were
which is
cartoons,
going
right?
to, you know, appeal to, you know, kids.
I'm trying to remember. Do you remember the Scooby-Doo cartoons? Like the Scooby-Doo? Like, weren't they in a band too? Or did they just ride around in that van and, solve mysteries? I can't remember.
You know, I didn't watch it.
Oh, okay.
So
But
I don't know.
the theme song
I
of the
didn't watch the Archies. The cartoon shows I didn't watch. I do have some of the CDs. Like I have a Banana Splits anthology.
See, that's when I was coming up. I'm 10 years younger than Ken, so as I was coming up and growing, I watched those shows all the time, like Banana Splits, the Archies, Josie and the Pussycat, um, Scooby Doo, whose theme song strikes me as very bubblegummy. Um, and yeah, so and the Monkees too. Like we used to watch the Monkees on like afternoon TV. Probably it was, I guess it was in reruns at that point, but all that, like that's sort of a deal. And then eventually you get into like the preteen idols, like Partridge Family, Osmonds, Bobby Sherman, DeFranco Family, Tommy Rowe. Um, do you categorize them as bubblegum music?
Well, yeah, I don't know if I am totally okay with having that label. That's what I hate about the people turn things into labels like stamps, you know. And you know, it seems like with Bobby Sherman in particular, the chunkiness of the 1910 Fruit Gum Company and the Ohio Express, that it was kind of sanded away And I'm not saying that as a negative for Bobby Sherman, just that the sound of his records does not sound exactly like the bubblegum of 68 and 69. Though his first big hit, and he had been around for a while, he had several records out, they all stiffed before, he had his breakthrough with Little Woman in summer of 69. But that song to me, even though that was a big hit, doesn't have the same kind of uh, stamp of Kazinet's Cats on it, and it was not a Kazinet's Cats record.
Great. Let me talk a little bit about the critical reception, and this is where you might have a reaction to what Unterberger says. Bubblegum was savaged by the rock press, which was outraged that simple claptrap like Yummy 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 records by groups that didn't even exist outside of the studio could sell millions of copies while sensitive, literate, progressive rockers and singer-songwriters struggled to be heard. After Bubblegum faded and punk emerged in the late 70s, some critics took a revisionist stance, hailing Bubblegum for its innovative production techniques and for boiling pop rock down to its irreducible essence. It's often been pointed out that one of the first songs the Talking Heads performed was the 1910 Fruit Gum Company's 123 Red Light. And the simple throbbing rhythm of lyrics of numbers like Psycho Killer have a distant relation to Bubblegum, although no one's going to confuse Talking Heads 77 with music aimed at preteens. Bubblegum's influence continues to pervade all music aimed at the record-buying public's youngest segment, which doesn't care who wrote the songs or even played on the records. Is that
I would pretty
square
much
with your...
agree with that, but and I think maybe we could include to some extent glam as kind of after the bubblegum music that, like a group like Sweet. You can hear that kind of chunky kind of essence that, is in some of their records too. It may be louder, and the guitars may be much more front and center, in that way. But I think there are whiffs of the old bubblegum tradition in that.
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to read folks some of the copy off the back cover of this compilation. I don't know if you have this compilation.
I know this, yeah.
Bubblegum Music is the Naked Truth. And
Another double entendre, to get naked truth in there,
right.
whatever.
So here's what they say. This is written by Neil Bogart, Vice President and General Manager of Budo Records. Bubblegum is the naked truth in music. Music was meant to be happy, free, unashamed, relaxed, natural, and easy, easy, easy. But then one day the serpent came slithering down the tree with an apple, and we all started wearing fig leaves. But wait, here's
Okay.
something new. Here's something old. Here's something that's pure enjoyment, love of love, love of life. It's bubblegum music. Put away your hair shirts and your unpaid bills and your textbooks and your knitting. Mama, papa, grandmama, sons, daughters, nieces, nephews, and cousins. Listen to this music. It's about sunshine and going places and falling in love and trusting love and dancing for the fun of it. Bubblegum music.
Okay.
Okay, I started, I better finish.
Although, see that's the one thing that is, it's a broad overview of a comment. If you go into those albums, you will find songs that aren't all sunshine and sweetie pie pop and I'm 10 years old and I'm having my first crush. There's a lot of that. But like the 1910s on their first album had a song called Poor Old Mr. Jensen. It's done to like a funeral dirge, and it's about this guy that dies, and what's all sunshine and happiness about that? I mean, it's so we have to be careful. On the Ohio Express's album, the album that has Yummy 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 on it, it's right behind your one shoulder there. There's a song that's almost 5 minutes long. That goes against the grain with what we think about bubblegum as being little 2 minute singles. Uh, and that song, if you did not call it a bubblegum record, if it weren't on an album that is so associated with that, and you just plucked that one song off, the time I can't remember the title. The Time You Spent with Me, I think it is. It's like this could have been on some sort of psychedelic album, you know. I mean, so uh, another, we haven't mentioned the group, but they had a huge hit in '68, and they were another part of the Casnet's Cats, were the Lemon Pipers.
Right. They're
Had a
on
big hit,
compilation.
yeah, who had a big hit with Green Tambourine.
Yep.
And flip over some of those early Lemon Piper singles, and you know, you have a song like "No Help from Me," and you have this guitar that sounds like it's gonna just kind of explode, you know, and the lyrics, you know, are kind of dark, you know. So I think it's you have to be a little bit careful about using such a wide brush on what we say is on those records.
For sure, for sure. Anyway, where do you recommend listeners start with Bubblegum if they want to explore this? Are there favorite albums or singles or compilations that you recommend?
Well, there have been several compilations of the 1910s and the Ohio Express. So you can go to Amazon or wherever and pick up something like that. As far as individual albums go, I don't see it behind you. There's the first album by the 1910 Fruit Gum Company called Simon Says. Oh, wait, maybe it is behind you.
That's right
Yes, it
here.
is. There it is. uh, and that album, I really, yeah. I mean, if I was interested, if I were interested in bubblegum, and I saw that in an oldies bin, I'd pick that one up.
That's what I did.
Yeah, well, there you go. You
Dollar
know,
bin.
that's how I got it. I didn't buy the, you know, I didn't, when I was 12 years old, you know, I was a kid. I didn't have money. Even though albums were much cheaper back in the day, you know, it was enough for me to be able to get a 45 every now and then. And so albums that would come out, I often didn't get them until they were remaindered and in oldies bins, you know, so I would discover the albums much later.
This Best from Buddha compilation up here is that's a nice compilation too. I like both of these compilations. If you can find these readily in the wild, if you hunt long enough, they will turn up. And uh,
Sometimes not even for all that much money, you know.
do you have like some favorite bubblegum songs, like your favorite singles from the era that come to mind?
Well, there's a lot, you know. Here's the funny thing with me. Uh, Sometimes the biggest bubblegum records on the charts are not my favorites. Like 1, 2, 3 Red Light. There's stuff that's on the album that I like much better than that, but that was a top 5 record. So, you know, just because it got the big radio push and play doesn't mean it's necessarily the songs that stand out for me. There's a funny little song on the 1, 2, 3 album called Shirley Applegate. I ended up writing a poem about her. Not a really bubblegum poem at all, you know, but it's like these characters and rhythms and songs. They're in my blood because I've played them so much, you know, over the years that it's not too surprising that, you know, it kind of comes forward to express itself in different ways.
Well, what we're saying here is there's more to bubblegum than meets the eye or the ear.
Or the tongue.
Or the tongue. Like you can go deep in here and find some gems on these albums. Some of the deep tracks are worth listening to. And yes, the essence of it is it's fun music. It's catchy music. It is sort of innocent in a lot of ways. And things don't have to be totally heavy duty all the time. And bubblegum is like a relief from that. I do think the genre there's a lot of revisionist thinking about it, and people appreciate it a lot more than they used to, for sure.
Probably, you know, as far as judgments that were made back in the day about bubblegum groups and bubblegum music, You know, this is proto bubblegum, I guess, but I think of the Monkees. You
Mhm.
know, they from the beginning were tagged the prefab four, you know, like a prefabricated, kind of a faux Beatles. And that was not meant kindly. That was meant as, you know, like, well, why would you listen to that? You know, and they had barely gotten out of the gate and they already had this, you know, kind of what I consider a very unfair moniker kind of tossed onto them. So I think the way people use these words, or even today, maybe even still think about those terms, uh, you might be missing out on some things you might like if you could get past the definitions.
For sure, for sure. Well, it's all about listening to the music, and what I'm gonna do is share a playlist in the show description of some various tracks that you can find almost all this stuff on YouTube, and I have a Bubblegum playlist I'm gonna share, and also, let us know if what your favorite Bubblegum records are, so leave a comment and like and subscribe, and, we're curious to hear what your favorites are or what your reaction to this genre was, what your experiences are with it, and also what the legacy is. Like, are there groups that sort of still work in that vein, people we haven't heard of? Share your knowledge. Ken, I wanted to also plug your radio show. You're still doing a radio show for the Widecast network, is that
Yes.
Widener Widecast?
Uh-huh.
And when does the show air?
6 o'clock to 8:30 Eastern Standard Time, PM, every Saturday.
And, I'll try to share a link to that show in the show description if people wanna check it out. What's the theme of your radio show?
I don't really have a theme. I play mostly 60s, but not just hits. I have some hits, but I like to have obscure things, B-sides, flops, that kind of thing. And I go outside the 60s too. I mean, there are other decades I play, but I guess the focus would be on the 60s.
Cool. And you do take requests as well,
Oh,
right?
yes, absolutely. If I have it, you know.
Anyway, thanks so much, Ken, for joining the show and sharing your knowledge of bubblegum music, and I hope this inspires people to explore this very fun genre.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Thanks for asking me on. It's fun for me to talk about
Yeah, good to have you back on the show. Bye-bye,
it.
everybody.
Bye.